And another part of your journey that I'd love to hear about, although obviously talking about it is reasonably personal, was a sense of the way Christianity relates to sexuality versus how Islam does. Would you mind saying a little bit about that moment in your life?
I suppose this also is something which is important to people who come out of the 1960s, the 1970s, when the traditional kind of dusty Puritanism that was normal in England really throughout the 1950s, the sense of shame and the problematizing of something which is the most elemental aspect of our biological humanity was the main thing that people were rebelling about in the 1960s. By the 1970s, it had become clear that there needed to be some kind of boundaries, regulation, otherwise people were going to get hurt, especially women. A lot of news coming out about cults in California, free love communes and so forth, and usually it was the women who were on the receiving end of most of those free love experiments. But certainly I believe that we are designed, whether by evolution or providence or both, to be inhabitants of the upper Paleolithic environment. In other words, to be part of the natural world. We're physically organic beings. And on that level, the production of life, and therefore a certain awe and reverence for the processes whereby life comes to be, is normal for human beings. And the earliest of all images are images of sort of fertility goddesses or pregnant women. We're not quite sure what they were because they go back to 40,000 BC. And it struck me that the type of religion, not just Christianity, that problematizes that emphasizes, for instance, clerical celibacy, that associates eros with some primordial fault in creation, the idea that reproduction is a consequence of original sin. Once we became mortal, we had to reproduce ourselves. Obviously, these are nowadays hotly contested topics in Christianity, but looking at the normative, medieval, or even very recent sort of chapel Christian attitude, struck me that quite a bit of damage could be done to human beings by problematizing something which is the most fundamental drive that we have. And that most religions, in fact, certainly not just Islam, but Judaism, many schools of Hinduism and so forth, actually have a very positive sense of sacred sexuality, and the leading thinkers produce pillow books, and that natural process is regarded as something sacred rather than a consequence of the loss of the sacred. So that, again, in the context of the 1970s, was something that was quite significant to me, that Christianity, in many of its forms, although the Reformation had allowed priests to marry, had possibly done quite a bit of damage to human beings by trying to suffocate that which sooner or later will express itself. And perhaps some of these abuse scandals that have hit some of the churches in recent years are evidence of the fact that this is a renegade, very powerful instinct, and you need to provide a space in which it can be celebrated and sacralized rather than treated as a kind of sort of concession to human nature.
Yes. It was really interesting reading that because it's not something I think in the public perception of Islam that is and part of the reason I like to talk to people, to interview people is to understand where their lived experience is very different from the kind of two-dimensional picture that we paint. But the fact that part of what drew you to Islam was your perception of it having a healthier understanding of sexuality was very interesting to me.